militaries and armed forces across the world had very difficulty to move on from your conventional threats to deal with that into what we know now as asymmetric threats. Until today, 20 years after we have seen the bombings in America, militaries that never manage to make that transformation successfully. And I think states don't know what to do with migration management. We have seen the responses by Trump, we have seen the responses by Hungary, we have seen the responses by the Austrian head of state, we have seen the Italian Minister of Home Affairs. And I just don't know whether as a country and as a panel you are sitting there, and I hear all the criticisms, I hear of the state institutions, how useless they are, but I'm not quite sure whether the debate is at the right level. Perhaps there's a need for this discussion. But for me, the discussion should be at what Koketso started off by saying. I have daily interactions with people on the street that are telling me that this is my frustration. The Minister of Home Affairs, now Minister of Home Affairs, might be correct to say that. There is a problem with people that are coming into this country for hospital services. And then I hear the panel talks about so-called counterfeit goods. That's a problem to me. And that is my take on the conversation. Perhaps I would have loved to hear what would this mean to South African future politics. And we didn't get to that. And migration, as I say again, it's a very complex matter, and I think the way that we are addressing it at the moment is perhaps not the right way of doing it.
All right. So definitely something for each of you to respond to. So why don't we just go in the order that we started? So start with Jan, and then we'll just wrap up.
To just follow up on your comments, I think if I'm not a policing expert, I don't know what the right thing would have been to do that day, but if the police government is serious about countering counterfeit goods, you don't go and target poor people trying to make a living. You have to start with the ports where these things are shipped in. You have to start with your corrupt officials that are allowing this to come in. So I think that's the conversation we should be having. It's not about what should have happened on that day, it's what led up to that day. And then just to comment on the appalling media coverage, I think the one thing to know is that these views are shared by people in universities and the media. It's not unique to something that happens out there on the street. It's people we interact with on a daily basis. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing is it's simply a lack of resources and time, constantly chasing the news. I'm lucky in that I'm not expected to put out a story every day or every few hours. Yeah.
Okay, two quick things. I think media coverage about these things, I think what at least when the coverage is on xenophobic violence, I can see some kind of media fatigue. It's no longer a big deal when foreigners are being attacked like it was in 2008. It's no longer big news. It has become normalized routine. It's like something that, so it doesn't make news anymore. So that's a big thing to say. Jacob, in terms of the response by neighboring countries, African countries, it hasn't been only threats. There's been instances where actually they took action. In Mozambique, remember the South African truck drivers were attacked, they prevented from getting into Mozambique. In Nigeria, MTN offices were closed for a day or two. So it's something that could help probably by the state to rethink its strategies in terms of responding to these issues. Because let's be honest, there is currently no incentives to push the state towards some kind of positive response to these issues. Incentives can be positive or negative, as you know. So far, there are no incentives. And as civil society and the others, as you know, we have failed to provide those incentives to government. We take government to court, we win cases, court orders ignored, we move the next case, nothing. So we don't have the political muscle to hold government accountable, and that has been one of the issues that state ignore these things. Too much on the state, yeah, and we should. we should be too harsh because what could have been the appropriate response? The question I ask, what is the response of the state when a similar situation happens? When the police is chased away by citizens, how does the state respond? Yeah? You don't see that kind of outrage by almost all the politicians, and you don't see the following week everything coming in to round up everyone and arrest everyone with papers or no paper. It doesn't happen. So I think what we are trying to say is equal treatment by the law. That's what it is. If the counterfeits, let the law take its course, proper processes, and everything cannot complain when the law is followed and it should be followed. I don't support illegality, not at all. But when even the law and the practice associated with it are perceived to be unjust, they will be resisted. I'm sure I've experienced in the apartheid where the police would use, but people resisted because they view the laws and the practices as unjust. The police are chased away because they're not seen as protection. They're seen as extortion forces. That's why they're chased away by the foreigners and the citizens alike.
Garth, you want to go? I know you have to run. So.
Yeah, I agree with the statement that we need to look at what people are thinking. So the political elite who make the decisions and have the power should look at what people are thinking. And we don't just look at what they say in the media and who speaks the loudest. There's lots of surveys. Institute for Justice and Reconciliation tells us that while there is a strong xenophobic sentiment amongst 20 to 30% of South Africans, most South Africans are not xenophobic and get on with no-nationals. Most South Africans realize that crime in their neighborhood is committed by local people for socio-economic reasons. And most South Africans do not think police are going to solve that problem. So if we listen to the statistics or we look at the surveys, we look at the research, and we respond to those needs, growing jobs, proper investment, end corruption, then the political elite will have a much stronger society and we won't have this kind of violence. Why do we need to have complex systems for managing borders that are completely porous? Why don't we just say, if you arrive at the border, we're going to take your fingerprints and photograph and give you a 3-month visa, and it's going to take you an hour to get renewed. Then we'll know exactly how many people are in this country. Then we can plan for our hospitals and schools. And you'll find something that will have detailed statistics that show that most people in South Africa are not foreign nationals. So why don't we make it easy for organized crime syndicates to smuggle people across borders, large numbers? Then the police will have an easy job. If you go through Johannesburg and find somebody who hasn't got their visa, they'll obviously up to no good because it's so easy to get a visa. So what we do is we criminalize hundreds of thousands of people. We don't know how many there are and we complain about it. So I think we need to rethink radically about how to do something that is humane, in line with our constitutional values, and acts in the interests of all people, not fearful people, not a few elites, and not capitalist systems.
But if we do that, what will happen to all the bribe takers in Great Britain and OR Tambo? Because that's part of the problem, you see, that there is an illicit system. So we need to have this inefficient system because it is also a corrupt system where the police are in on the take. That's part of the problem. Now, immigration is complex. Yeah, maybe it is complex. I mean, for me to be stopped every time I travel to the USA and to Switzerland and everywhere to be pulled aside, it must be because immigration is complex. But there are people for whom immigration is not complex. They can travel virtually anywhere in the world, and they are able to get the visas very quickly. So, and to build on what you have just said now, why do we look at immigration as a problem? Why don't we look at the influx and the mobility of people across as a plus, as an economic injection, rather than as a burden? Why don't we change the way we think about the human beings who are traveling around the world and moving around the world in search of economic opportunity and educational opportunity? And this is not just about South Africa, it's about the whole world. And I think We just need a mindset change in terms of how we view immigrants, not just in South Africa, but everywhere. Now, informality, world-class city, I sometimes cringe every time I hear about world-class cities. I went to Kigali a few times, and one of my remarks was that Kigali was so clean, it made me sick. It was not only clean of debt, it was also clean of people, of traders and hawkers. They've been cleaned out. I don't know how they managed to do it. Maybe that's what South Africa is trying to do now. And so, you know, this ideal of being world class and this notion that informality in and of itself is a bad thing when you have as much inequality as we have, I think becomes very problematic.
So yeah, I love that, you know. It's so interesting how we think of world class as this manufactured symbolic order, where it is clean of people, clean of vibrancy, which is what a city is supposed to be about. And think about the cities in South Africa. It's not unique to Johannesburg, right? In another council, the DA and the ANC voted together to have waste reclaimers shot with paint guns, right? Yeah, this was a way to. In eThekwini, the criminalization of urinating in the public, which will disproportionately affect the homeless in cities that cannot offer public toilets. We know who you are criminalizing right there, you know? So it's all of these ways in which world-classness becomes about othering, keeping out, killing the vibrancy. If there is no vibrancy, if there is no graffiti, if there are no people, is that really a city? Is that a place we want to live in? And actually, if we think about it, the absence of people in the street make places much more unsafe, right? Where you are walking alone and there are no people around. Alan's story, this pastor, loves to talk about how Commissioner Street became unsafe because one of the early shops, you know those garage pull-down doors, installed one of those. And then the other shopkeepers also thought, okay, my place might get robbed because I don't have this thing, so I'm going to put it in as well. But by all of them doing that, it meant for you walking in the street, the light from the shops was then gone, right? It then created this sense of, not enough of us can be in the street because it's too dark. So yeah, I completely agree. This idea that informality is a problem, informality is the heart of the city. We've got the richest square mile here in Johannesburg, there in Sandton, but the bulk of transactions and the bulk of revenue that is being exchanged, money that's moving, is happening in the inner city. It is not happening in Sandton by anything. So we really got to resist this like manufactured order, this order that says that some people, that reinforces the idea of there are certain people who do not belong. There are certain people who are not really human beings. And then just in terms of like, you know, the laws and so on, yes, it's not a complex process actually. You know, there is so much that can be done to undo this. There is so much ways in which we could actually materially benefit very real human lives in practical ways if we made it easier for people to move around. As has been said before, this is not the first time in the history of humankind that people are moving around. What made it easier back then, you know? What are the possibilities right now? The problem is, when we start with it, and with our point of departure being this is a problem, we will respond in ways that respond to a problem in very complex ways. And then just the xenophobic stuff has really seeped into our policy in so many ways, you know? We're talking about when a whole health department can get a memo that says, do not provide healthcare to certain people. Even when the memo is withdrawn, a message has been sent out, right? So we've seen it in various ways, you know, both casually and actually in very formal democratic processes seep in, become a part and parcel of who we are. But again, it's not unusual. It is so much a logical conclusion of where things are. Think about August, think about Marikana, and so on, some of the policing incidents that have been mentioned here. They've been spoken about as if they were events. They were incidents, they are things that lead up to them. Before a Marikana, before any police officer came face to face with a mine worker, conditions had been put in place to get them to that point, you know? And I do think, so we have to be in this for the long game, you know? Think much more deeply about the ways in which we exclude, you know, every single day, that reinforce and create new forms of exclusion, that reinforce and create ways that, you know, those who are failing can scapegoat others, you know? Where there is inequality, there will be violence. Who will bear the burden of that violence? We should be addressing inequality. We should be, and this idea that the economy is so small, you know, so when people come in, we are not going to be able to provide them all. Actually, there's a lot of wealth in South Africa, you know, and we're not just talking about what exists right now. We're talking about things like, if we had to clamp down on illicit financial flows, if we had to clamp down on tax evasion, if we had to clamp down on, there are very real, big injustices out here that are looting from what should be, what would service any single human being who exists in this country. That's what we should be addressing.
Okay, this gives me a last word. It's not going to make a big statement. I just want to pick up on something you said, and which I think links very well to what I've been trying to say here. It's really the distraction from the real issues which is taking place here, right? So I think people get upset about fake goods in many ways, but I think one of the kind of things they in awe and yet attracted to it, and yet they also kind of rejected by it, is this idea that fake goods, they know exactly how the economy works, right? They know that you create something through producing an aura. It doesn't require much labor, you produce huge value, but you actually don't distribute a lot of money at the same time. Fake goods play with that, they democratize it, but they're also not they're not an alternative economy. They're just an inversion of a very destructive economy in itself. People go for that because it's available. They go for the fake, they go for that kind of criticism of that economy instead of going for a criticism of a different economy, which is then embedded in the kind of statehood we see every day and which is indeed protected by the police. And yet the police is complicit, pointing people in the direction of these fake goods. So it's this distraction, it's this scapegoating which is going on, which I think is really problematic in this whole setup.
Okay, I'm not going to try to summarize what I think has been an extremely rich and not particularly uplifting discussion, but one that I think is important and one that needs to continue. And I think you've done an excellent job, and you, the speakers, but also the audience, of contextualizing, as you said, single events or instances within a context of South Africa's broader political transformation, getting the institutions right, figuring out where South Africa fits on the continent, and figuring out also what it even means to be South African going forward. So I want to thank our speakers, of course, the audience, Sibongile, Lenore, Naledi, the others who helped organize the events, and to invite you to follow XenoWatch, to follow ACMS, of course, on Twitter, and to follow all of our speakers on Twitter and Facebook, and to then join us outside to continue the conversation. So thank you, and